It is the autumn of 1396, and Westminster Abbey glows with the light of hundreds of candles. The air is heavy with incense, with whispers, with expectation. And there you are, Isabella of Valois, 6 years old, your dark eyes wide beneath the jeweled veil. The crown of France presses on your small head like a burden meant for someone else, someone older, someone stronger. But no, it is yours, today, because today you are not a child. Today, you are a queen. The choir sings, their voices soaring into the vaulted ceiling. Bishops in scarlet robes intone the holy words. Around you, nobles and courtiers lean forward, their breaths held. For this is no ordinary marriage. This is history, written not in love but in politics, not in hearts but in treaties. And before we go deeper, ask yourself this: if a 6-year-old child can be crowned queen and wielded like a weapon in wars she never chose, how many stories like this have been buried? Subscribe now, because if you turn away, these lives vanish into silence again, and history counts on our silence to forget its cruelties. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's uncover how this 6-year-old girl was forced into England's most haunting role, a forgotten queen. At your side stands Richard II of England. He is 29, a king already weathered by betrayal and rebellion. His hair is touched with grey, his face solemn, his voice steady as he vows to take you as his bride. To him, you are not a wife but a promise, a fragile thread of peace between two kingdoms that have bathed each other in blood for more than half a century. The 100 Years' War has left fields in ruin, villages empty, fathers and sons buried in foreign soil. And now, with your small hand placed in Richard's larger one, France and England pretend, for one glittering moment, that peace is possible. The abbey erupts in applause. Trumpets sound. You are crowned Queen of England, your crown so heavy that your ladies-in-waiting must steady it as it slips forward on your brow. You smile, because you have been taught to smile. But inside, you are only a child, torn from the gardens of France, thrust into the politics of men. Your story begins not in England, but in Paris. You were born in 1389, daughter of King Charles VI and Queen Isabella of Bavaria. But your father's mind was already unraveling. He was called Charles the Mad, plagued by fits of violence and delusion. Sometimes he forgot he was king at all. Sometimes he forgot he had children. Your mother, ambitious and cunning, ruled in his place, arranging alliances with a cold, calculating hand. And so when Richard II of England, desperate for peace, offered marriage to the Valois line, it was your hand she placed on the table. Not because you were ready, but because you were useful. At 6 years old, you became a diplomatic weapon. England did not welcome you quietly. It roared with pageantry. Banners snapped in the wind above London's streets, cloth of gold shimmered from balconies, and the people pressed shoulder to shoulder just to glimpse you, a child draped in silks, paraded as a queen. Some stared with pity, whispering of innocence lost. Others with scandal, muttering that this was not a marriage but a spectacle. And Richard? For once, he played the gentle king. He did not reach for the body of a child. He reached for something far more valuable, peace. You were not his partner. You were his symbol, a pawn crowned in pearls. Windsor became your gilded cage. Apartments fit for a queen, tutors to bend your tongue around English and Latin, priests to school you in obedience, a retinue of ladies to keep watch. And among them, one face that mattered. Margaret Holland. A girl your own age. A companion. A secret confidant in a kingdom that would never let you forget. You belonged to it, long before you could belong to yourself. Together you played, studied, whispered secrets late at night. For all the titles and crowns, you were still children. And Richard, though he was your husband, was almost like a father. He visited your chambers, listened to your lessons, brought you gifts from his travels. He called you Little Queen. He never touched you as a man touches a wife. For that, you were grateful. Yet even as you laughed with Margaret, even as you stroked the fur of your little lapdog in Windsor Gardens, you felt the weight of expectation. You were not here for yourself. You were here for France. You were here for England. Your marriage was a treaty made flesh. At banquets, nobles whispered, Some mocked Richard for marrying a child, calling it desperation. Others praised him for securing peace without bloodshed. And you smiled, as you had been taught, but inside you wondered, what is peace when it rests on the shoulders of a girl still learning to read? Time passed. You grew into your role. At 7, you were crowned formally at Westminster. At 8, you gave speeches, trained in courtly manners, posed for portraits in gowns far too heavy for your small frame. You became England's little bride, adored by some, doubted by others, but always watched. For now, peace held. French merchants crossed the Channel. English envoys visited Paris. And all the while, you remained the golden thread binding two crowns. But threads are fragile. And already, in the shadows of Richard's court, rebellion was stirring. For now, you remain in the glow of candles, in the echo of choirs, in the fragile peace of a marriage that is not a marriage. You are Isabella. You are 6 years old. And you are Queen of England. The ships carried you across the Channel, sails full of wind, the grey waters stretching endlessly between France and England. You were no longer just Isabella, daughter of Charles VI. You were the Queen of England now, though still a child, and your new life awaited you on foreign soil. London welcomed you with a roar. The streets were draped in cloth of gold, flowers strewn at your feet as you rode in procession. Crowds pressed forward, desperate to see the little queen from France. Some cheered with genuine joy, hoping that this marriage would finally bring an end to decades of war. Others whispered doubts. What use was a child on England's throne? Could a girl of 7 really be a queen? You smiled, because you had been taught to smile. You waved, because that was what queens did. But inside, you longed for the gardens of Paris, for the safety of your mother's embrace. At Westminster, they placed a crown upon your head once more. Too heavy, too large, slipping down over your brow until your ladies adjusted it. The people cheered, the trumpets blared, and you were presented to the world as Isabella, Queen Consort of England. In that moment, you felt not just the weight of metal, but the weight of kingdoms pressing down on your small shoulders. Your new home was Windsor Castle, a fortress of stone and history. The rooms were vast, the corridors echoing with footsteps of servants and courtiers. There, you were given your own household, your own apartments, your own attendants. Margaret Holland became your closest friend, a girl of noble birth who shared your games, your lessons, your laughter. Together, you whispered secrets beneath the tapestries, practiced your letters by candlelight, and dreamed of futures you could not yet understand. Richard, your husband, your king, treated you not as a wife but as a daughter. He visited your apartments often, bringing gifts of books, jewels, and small pets to amuse you. He listened as you recited your lessons, praised your progress in English, and called you my little queen. At banquets, you sat beside him, your feet dangling above the floor, your presence a living reminder of the fragile peace between England and France. When envoys came, they bowed to you as they bowed to him. You learned to sit still, to smile gracefully, to play your part in this grand performance of monarchy. Yet Richard was no fool. He knew that beneath the silks and jewels, you were still a child. He did not demand from you the duties of a wife. Instead, he gave you time to grow, time to learn, time to become the woman England expected you to be. And in return, you gave him something he had not known in years, affection without judgment. The crowds adored you. To them, you were sweetness incarnate, a child queen draped in hope, proof that the blood-soaked wars could finally end. Minstrels wrote songs of you, a dove sent to heal England's wounds. But the music never drowned out the whispers. Some laughed at Richard, sneering that he had taken a wife young enough to be his daughter. Others spoke more darkly still, that this was no marriage at all, only a fragile truce, destined to collapse the moment your innocence gave way to womanhood. You did as you were taught. You smiled, you curtsied, you wore the mask of queenship with unflinching grace. But behind the velvet curtains, when the candles burned low, a question gnawed at you like hunger. Was peace ever real, if it balanced so precariously on the frail shoulders of a child? Life at court was a mixture of splendor and solitude. You learned to dance, to sing, to play the lute. You studied English history and scripture. You practiced your handwriting until your fingers ached. And always, there were eyes upon you, attendants, tutors, courtiers, each measuring your every word, every gesture, every breath. In moments of freedom, you and Margaret laughed until your sides hurt, running through the gardens, playing games as any children would. Those were the moments you felt most alive, most yourself. But they were fleeting, stolen between lessons and ceremonies, between banquets and prayers. Because you were not simply Isabella anymore. You were England's little bride, a living treaty, a fragile thread of peace. And peace, for now, held. Trade flowed between England and France. Diplomats spoke of reconciliation. For a brief moment, it seemed the long nightmare of the 100 Years' War might finally be ending. But beneath the surface, Richard's kingdom was not at peace. His rule was fragile, his nobles restless, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke watching with hungry eyes. And though you were too young to understand the danger, you could feel it, in the tense whispers of courtiers, in the sudden silences when you entered a room, in the way Richard sometimes looked at you with a weariness that no child could cure. You were his symbol of peace. But peace is never permanent. For now, you remain in Windsor's halls, a little girl in silks, adored by some, doubted by others, watched by all. You are Isabella. You are England's little bride. And though you are only a child, the fate of kingdoms rests upon your small shoulders. The peace you carried like a crown was never built to last. Not in England, where noble families sharpened daggers behind velvet curtains. Not in France, where your father's madness left the throne weak and trembling. And not in Richard's court, where loyalty was a mask worn only until power shifted. You were 9 years old when the cracks widened into fractures. At first, it was whispers. Courtiers muttering in corridors, servants rushing with nervous faces, Richard's voice low and sharp behind closed doors. You asked your ladies what troubled the court, but they smiled too quickly, their eyes sliding away. Then came the changes. Attendants dismissed without warning. Guards doubled at Windsor. Messages carried in secret. You felt it before you knew it, something was unraveling. One night, Richard came to you. The hour was late, the corridors of Windsor hushed, the air thick with the smell of wax and smoke. His crown seemed heavier than ever, pressing his head down, etching deep lines into his face. He took your hand, his broad, calloused palm engulfing your small fingers, and for a fleeting moment, he was no longer the King of England. He was a man cornered, a man afraid. There are those, he murmured, his voice raw, who would strip from me what is mine. You must be brave, Isabella. Brave for me. You nodded, because what else could you do? Because how could a child queen fight shadows? Think about it, a child sworn to bravery while grown men sharpened daggers in the dark. If you can stomach that, you owe it to yourself to stay. And if you haven't subscribed yet, ask why. Is it easier to look away? Or to face history's darkest betrayals head-on? Decide now. But you were 6. Too young to understand what monsters he meant, too young to fight shadows that wore crowns and carried swords. Yet even then, you felt it, danger was not outside your marriage. It was seeping into its very heart. The shadows had a name, Henry Bolingbroke. Richard's cousin was no ghost of exile. He returned with steel at his back, an army bristling with vengeance, nobles eager to trade loyalty for survival, eager to see Richard fall. While the king sailed for Ireland, Henry moved like a storm. Gates swung open before him, castles yielded without a fight, and lords bent their knees as though England herself was done with Richard's pride. The tide had turned, and it did not turn in Richard's favor. You were swept into the Tower of London, for your safety, they told you. But even at 6, you understood, safety and prison often wore the same stone walls. From the tower's windows, you watched the Thames churn, wondering if Richard would return, if the man who called you his queen could still protect you, if the fragile peace he forged on your tiny shoulders had already shattered. When Richard came back, it was no triumph. He did not ride into England as a king. He stumbled into it as a man surrounded, stripped, betrayed. His banners no longer flew, his friends had vanished like mist. The crown was slipping, and he could not hold it. He came to you once more, in secret, before they dragged him away. You remember it still, the way he lowered himself before you, his knees on the cold stone, his hollow eyes searching yours. His cheeks were sunken, his voice little more than a rasp. In that moment, he was no longer the king who ruled England. He was a broken man, begging history not to forget him. "My little queen," he murmured, "they will not let me keep you safe. But remember, you were never a pawn to me. You were hope. You were at peace." You clung to him, not understanding fully, but sensing the finality in his voice. He was gaunt, his face pale, his voice hoarse. Hours later, Richard was gone, a king dethroned, a husband erased, leaving behind a widow who was only 10 years old. If that unsettles you, good. It should. Subscribe now, because the next revelations cut even deeper. And if you refuse? Then tell me in the comments why. Tell me why a child's grief doesn't deserve to be remembered. It was the last time you ever saw him. Henry Bolingbroke seized the throne, crowning himself Henry IV. And you, Isabella, were no longer queen but prisoner. The tower became your cage. At only 10 years old, you were asked to recognize Henry as king, to accept his authority, to smile for the man who had stolen your crown. You refused. You were a child, yes, but you were also Valois, daughter of France, Queen of England in your own right, however young. You told them you would not call him king. You told them you were Richard's wife, bound to him by God and by law. It was defiance, and it was dangerous. Then the news came. Richard was dead. Some said he starved himself in prison. Others whispered Henry's men had murdered him in the dark. The truth was buried with him, sealed behind stone walls and silence. But for you, the truth was simpler. The man who had been your husband, your guardian, your protector, was gone. You were 10 years old, and you were a widow. You wept until your body ached. For days you refused food, refused company, refused to leave your chambers. Margaret Holland tried to comfort you, but how could she? You had lost the only figure in England who had treated you with kindness. And in his place stood Henry IV, watching you with suspicion, seeing not a child but a symbol of France, a girl whose blood tied her to a throne he now wore uneasily. Your father demanded your return. France raged at Richard's death, calling it murder. Henry stalled, keeping you as a bargaining chip. For months, you lived in limbo, not queen, not free, caught between crowns that saw you as nothing more than leverage. But even as grief hollowed you, strength began to form in its place. You were young, but you had learned quickly. You smiled less, listened more. You spoke carefully, with the dignity of a queen twice your age. And in that composure, in that silent refusal to bend, you found power. For now, you sit in the tower, your crown gone, your husband dead, your future uncertain. You are Isabella. You are 10 years old. And your kingdom has fallen to ruin. The walls of the tower pressed close, cold stone echoing with footsteps and whispers. You were no longer Queen of England. You were no longer even a bride. You were a girl of 10, dressed in silks that felt like chains, guarded like a prisoner. Henry IV visited you once, his face stern, his crown heavy. He spoke as though you should bow, as though you should smile and call him king. You stared back at him with dark, unflinching eyes. No, you whispered. It was not a child's tantrum. It was defiance. You would not betray Richard's memory. You would not place your loyalty at the feet of the man who had stolen his throne. That defiance frightened him more than tears ever could. For you were young, but you were still Valois, daughter of France, granddaughter of kings, niece to dukes who commanded armies. To Henry, you were a hostage. To France, you were a pawn. And in between, you clung to the only power you had left, refusal. Your father, Charles VI, demanded your return. The French court raged at Richard's death, calling it murder, calling it treason. Your mother, Queen Isabella of Bavaria, pressed the demand with sharp, unyielding words. Henry stalled. He had taken the throne, but he had not taken you, and that made you dangerous. In his hands, you were no longer a queen, no longer a child. You were leverage, a bargaining chip that could decide the fragile balance between England and France. So he offered a compromise. Forget Richard, forget the crown you had worn at 6. Marry again. This time to his son, a boy who would one day be Henry V. A union to bind the kingdoms tighter. But you refused. Even as a child, you saw the insult for what it was. You would not lie beside the son of the man who had destroyed Richard. You might have been small, powerless, imprisoned, but you carried something Henry could not break, honor. And in that honor, you defied him. But you endured. Silent, dignified, unbroken. You said no, when silence was safer. You defied the man who thought he owned your fate. If you don't subscribe after this, ask yourself, do you really want to forget the few women who dared to resist? Or are you content to let their voices die twice, once in history, and once here? The months dragged on in silence. The tower was no palace, only stone corridors and walled gardens that mocked you with their gates. Margaret Holland, your one confidant, had been dismissed on Henry's orders. Her absence hollowed the days. Loneliness crept around you like a shroud, heavy, suffocating, endless. And yet, you endured. You did not scream. You did not break. Even as a forgotten queen in a foreign land, you held yourself with a dignity that made even your captors wary. Silent. Untouchable. Unbroken. In 1401, after endless negotiations, Henry relented. You would be returned to France. The day you left England was heavy with sorrow. Crowds gathered on the riverbanks as your ship prepared to sail. Some cheered, some jeered, some whispered prayers. You stood at the rail, a small figure in black, dressed in mourning for Richard. As the coastline slipped away, you felt the weight of two worlds pulling at your heart. England had been your prison, yes, but also your home. Richard's kindness, Margaret's laughter, the halls of Windsor, they were yours as much as France had ever been. Now, all of it receded into the grey mist of the Channel. Paris welcomed you with ceremony. Trumpets sounded, banners flew, and your mother embraced you with tears upon her cheeks. But the court you returned to was not the court you had left. Your father's madness had worsened. There were days he thought himself made of glass, days he screamed at shadows only he could see, days he wandered the palace gardens barefoot and broken. Your mother, Isabella of Bavaria, held power in his stead, ruthless, calculating, determined to secure her children's futures, even at the cost of their happiness. You were paraded as both triumph and tool. The little widow, returned from England, a symbol of French resilience. Poets wrote verses in your honor. Nobles bowed low. Yet beneath the celebration, you felt the cold truth. You had not come home to safety. You had come home to politics. Whispers began at once. Would you be married again? Would you be bound to another prince, another treaty, another pawn's role in the endless chess game of kings? Your hand was valuable, perhaps more valuable than before. You were the widow of an English king, a living reminder of the fragile truce between crowns. Your mother urged caution, but you saw it in her eyes. She would not hesitate to use you again. Yet you were not the same child who had been led down Westminster's aisle at 6. You had known loss. You had known defiance. You had learned that silence could be sharper than a sword. And when suitors were whispered, English, French, even foreign princes, you spoke clearly. I will not be a pawn again. Still, the war pressed on. England and France circled one another like wolves, each waiting for weakness. Your very presence was a reminder of the failed peace. Some at court urged your father to use you as a weapon, to push claims, to provoke, to challenge Henry's throne. But you resisted. You carried yourself with dignity, with quiet strength, with the bearing of a queen even in widowhood. You chose not to be the spark of another war. Instead, you turned inward, to study, to prayer, to reflection. In the royal palaces of Paris, you grew from child to young woman. No longer Richard's bride, no longer Henry's hostage, but Isabella in your own right. For now, you walk the halls of Paris again, older, wiser, carrying scars no child should bear. You are Isabella, the widow of England, the daughter of France, and the pawn who refuses to play the game. Paris, 1406. 17 years old. You are no longer the child dragged across the channel in silks too heavy for your shoulders. No longer the widow veiled in endless mourning black. You have grown, sorrow has tempered you, but it has not broken you. And now, for the first time, a marriage is placed before you not as a weapon, not as a treaty, but as something that almost feels like a choice. His name is Charles of Orleans. 15 years old. Heir to a house so powerful it commands armies, wealth, and fear. But Charles is not Richard. He is not your mother's pawn. He is gentle, poetic, the kind of boy who carries verses in his heart instead of daggers in his sleeves. When he looks at you, it is not as France's bargaining chip or England's forgotten queen. He looks at you as Isabella. The wedding blazes with splendor. Silks shimmer from Florence, jewels glitter from Flanders, feasts spill across nights thick with song and wine. Courtiers whisper approval, poets sharpen their quills to sing of love instead of treaties. And when Charles takes your hand, it does not crush yours, it does not weigh heavy with years of power. It trembles. Young. Nervous. Alive. Like yours. And in that tremor, you feel something dangerous, something rare in your world of bargains and betrayals, possibility. You build a household together, not of fear, not of suspicion, but of warmth. Laughter drifts through halls once silent. Books, music, gardens, not guarded, not watched, but walked freely. You are partners. Equals. And when your belly swells with life, hope stirs with it. A child. A future. Not forged in treaties, not chained by politics, but born of something far more powerful. Love. But France is restless. The kingdom buckles under its own weight. Your father, Charles VI, slips further into the abyss of madness, his crown a hollow shell upon a vacant king. Your mother plots in smoky chambers with the Burgundians, while the Orleans faction sharpens its swords in answer. Paris trembles, for the air reeks of civil war, brothers against cousins, kinsmen ready to drench the cobblestones in blood. And there you stand. No longer the pawn traded across a channel, no longer the hostage behind tower walls. You are drawn into the fray not as a child but as a woman with a voice. When men bellow for war, you plead for peace. When your young husband is pressed into bloodshed, you temper his rage with caution. You are 17, then 18, then 19, and yet you carry the weary wisdom of someone twice her age, one who has seen kingdoms collapse on her shoulders before. And the court listens. Even the men who scoff at queens fall silent when you speak. Because you are no longer the child bride, the foreign token, the forgotten widow. You are Isabella of Valois, Duchess of Orleans. A woman who learned how to wear tragedy like armor, and how to wield it like a sword. But fate is cruel to those who shine too brightly. Childbirth weakens you. Complications tear at your body, leaving you fragile, fevered, struggling to recover. You are 20 years old, barely stepping into womanhood, and your body begins to betray you. Charles sits by your bedside, reading verses to you, holding your hand. He refuses to leave, refuses to let you slip away in silence. But love cannot stop death. And when you become pregnant, hope blooms. A child, a future, a continuation not forged by treaties but by love. But history, cruel as ever, had other plans. This is the moment most turn away, because it hurts too much. But you're still here. So subscribe now, prove you can face the cruelties history tried to erase. And if you won't, leave your reason in the comments. Tell the world why you'd rather look away while Isabella fades into the shadows. At 20 years old, a widow once, a wife twice, a queen, a duchess, a child, a woman. In September of 1409, you are gone. Paris mourns. The poets write elegies. Courtiers weep at your bier. Your husband, Charles, is inconsolable. He buries himself in verse, in words, in memory, poetry that will echo through France for generations, shaped by the love he lost too soon. Your death leaves not just sorrow, but a void. In a kingdom tearing itself apart, you had been a voice of calm, of dignity, of peace. Without you, the storm only grows darker. France will bleed, and your son will grow up in a world at war. But history does remember you, Isabella. Not only as the child bride draped in jewels too heavy for her small frame. Not only as the widow who stared down the throne that had stolen her husband. Not only as the pawn traded between crowns. No, history remembers the way you carried yourself when every chain should have broken you. As a girl who wore captivity like a crown. As a woman who found love in an age built on cruelty. As a voice of fragile peace in a kingdom that worshipped war. And though your years were brief, your story lingers, proof that even in a world ruled by kings, armies, and treaties written in blood, a single woman's dignity could defy them all. It is not the conquerors who echo here, Isabella. It is you. You are Isabella, the child queen, the little bride, the widow, the duchess. And though your life was brief, your story is eternal. The curtain falls. The candles fade. But history remembers your name.